All those who are holding tickets outside will get in as fast as they can. I'm speaking not to you, ladies and gentlemen, but I'm speaking to the crowd on the outside, who seem to be standing rather reluctant to come in, and we're going to start this very soon.
Welcome back to Worthy. I'm Ben.
And I'm John.
And on this episode, we're going to be talking about West Side Story, the 1961 Best Picture winner. But we wanted to start off this episode talking about Hollywood's original thought problem, and that is remakes. And the fact that Hollywood loves to remake, they love to take something old and just make it new, put the new technology, new spins and bells and whistles on it to make it seem like that it's original, to make it seem like that it's something new and extravagant and fun to go to the movie theaters. And it's great to go to the movie theaters, but that still leaves this big void of original ideas, original thought, original concepts. And we keep on, and especially in today's world, we keep on rehashing the same stories over and over again. And West Side Story is kind of the perfect example of the same story being remade over and over and over again. So first off, the 1961 movie is a remake of a Broadway musical that is adapted from a Shakespeare play that is also adapted from an Italian poem. And that 1961 movie that was adapted on all those things was then remade last year, 2021, by Steven Speilberg for the 2021 version of West Side Story. And as fun and as much as Quentin Tarantino loved that West Side Story, there is still an overall, to me, issue with the fact that Hollywood can't seem to get out of its own way and wants to just rehash and remake everything because they don't want to try something new. At least that's how I perceive it. So, John, I kind of just want to open up the floor first on that idea of Hollywood's problem with not coming out with new ideas, new, I was about to say products, but new films. Films are products, though. There's a business side to it.
Yeah, I mean, it's really tricky. I feel like we'll definitely get into it with the West Side Story, but I feel like it's a perfect film, really, to remake. Not really in terms of marketing. I think when the film came out, we saw how kind of poorly it performed. I mean, we're talking about a 60-year-old musical. Not even my parents went to go see the movie, which I think says a lot, which, I mean, it's older than my father, I think. So it just clearly struggled. It felt like it was something that Spielberg personally wanted to do, and that's probably why it happened. But to get into the reasons of why I think it was remade, I don't really know. I think from a personal point of view, I think you could see just Spielberg loved the movie, and I think really the biggest reason West Side Story deserved to be remade was specifically when it comes to race, and I think we'll definitely get to that and the way the new film represents Puerto Ricans and people of Latin culture. But in terms of remakes in general, I mean, it is crazy. It is a problem. I mean, I think this came up when we recently saw that there is going to be a remake of a Best Picture winner, third Best Picture winner, All Quiet on the Western Front. And I saw that Netflix is making it. I think it's German made now. So it's cool to see different point of views and perspectives. I think people don't really think about like these Oscar Academy films when they think of remakes. I think it's more so they think of big brands, IPs. They think of these big characters that kind of dominate what pop culture is now in film. So it's odd to look at a 6-year-old musical and say we should remake that. One, musicals aren't really that popular anymore. It's kind of odd to kind of push a musical in general, especially a huge musical like this and an iconic musical, especially for the time, even winning the Best Picture award. So there's definitely certain reasons. I always think of technically, like how can you improve something on a technical point of view. We recently talked about Ben Hur, which obviously was remade as well, and we didn't go too much into that remake, but that certainly is like one of the biggest reasons I could think of. You know, you want to technically improve something, you want it to be bigger in a lot of different ways. But yeah, Ben, why do you think we're kind of stuck here? I think it also has to do with just being we're not running out of stories, but stories are very cyclical, and a lot of stories are really similar. But why do you think that Hollywood loves their remakes?
They love their remakes because, to me, it's just the idea that it's comforting. Like people find comfort in the same things and happening over and over again. And West Side Story is, it's so easy, I think, to remake it because it's such an iconic musical. And one of the things that I realized upon watching it this time around, because I have seen West Side Story not just in this movie in the 2021, but I saw it on Broadway. My high school, the senior year was West Side Story, and I worked on the stage crew for that. So I saw that performance countless times while rehearsing it. So I feel, and there's a lot of also personal things. We'll get into that. With my family and how they valued it, but the musical is so popular and so big, and what I found when watching this time around, that it became accessible for everybody in the theaters in 1961, and like that must have been huge for someone in Chicago, let's say. Like they're not many people probably going to Broadway, but they know West Side Story, and so instead of maybe waiting for that to come to Chicago to a stage, that they were able to see it in the theater. So that was like a huge deal. And so why Hollywood is like fascinated by like constantly remaking is because of, again, that comfort, but also people are going to go out and flock to go see it. So it's kind of this, it is very cyclical, and like there are a lot of stories do have the same themes and ideas and concepts, but it gets masked by how creative you can be. And so then when it comes to remakes, it kind of feels like, oh, well, you already had something to base your creativity on. And I'm sure it'll come up throughout the discussion with Spielberg's version of West Side Story. But he kind of, like, as great as Spielberg is, I'm not trying to take away from him, but isn't it kind of easy for them just to be like, oh, well, we can use not just the original music, the original score, the original performances of it on Broadway. We can use this film version. We can use later versions of the play and the musical. So it's like you have a lot to kind of base it off of, which is why it looked really great, and it was Spielberg as well. So you gotta have to give credit where credit's due. But it's definitely this thing where I feel like when it comes to remakes, you can so easily look at the original and then base your whole entire idea and entire creative approach to it just by that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's hard to give something full credit when it is a remake and you have that like kind of foundation, unless it really is so out there and kind of going beyond what the original like source material is. And the two movies are very similar. And I think we'll get into which we prefer definitely throughout the podcast here, but it is an odd question because it's something that we're going to continue to see. I think there's going to be continually more remakes because it's easy to kind of sell something with a name that's recognizable. The marketing's kind of already there for you. Whether that is like a successful thing or not is, I think, up to certain brands. I mean, I think both this and Ben Hur would be considered a bomb in terms of box office. So it's hard. I think there's a lot of expectations when you remake something too, especially when you remake something that is known to be such a classic. Like, that is putting like an insane amount of pressure on you. So on one hand, yeah, you do have that extra kind of cheat sheet. You have the reference of what to do, what not to do. But at the same time, that's also a lot of pressure on you to kind of make things different without making things too different. There's a lot of baggage to come along with it. And as far as I'm concerned, as far as I remember, I should say, I don't think Spielberg's ever remade a film or really done anything like this. So it also could be, an experiment for someone who's been in the industry for 40 years at this point, someone who's just made almost every kind of film there is. And it is probably like an experiment for him, much like the Psycho remake in the 90s was, where it was shot for shot the same. And I think there's something to that. I think when you're as big as Spielberg, you can get away with something like that, but it's tricky.
Yeah, it's actually fascinating you brought up that Psycho remake, because what Gus Van Sant basically did was he just went shot for shot, and his whole stance was that Hitchcock nailed it so perfectly the first time around that I'm just recreating it and like paying homage to it, and I feel like that's an interesting take on it, because he's not changing anything besides just putting different characters and putting it in color. It's the same exact movie, same exact like shot for shot. Whereas Spielberg, he took some liberties, and I'm not going to say those are bad liberties, but he took like creative ideas and he expanded upon the story in different ways, and which I think enhanced it and added color to it and added a whole different like aura to it, and that's what makes like West Side Story interesting, because of how it has been remade and the use of the shark speaking Spanish in later adaptations of it. Tony's like depth and his his background was explored a little bit more in the Spielberg version versus the 61 version. So it's fascinating you brought up the idea of Psycho, but also when we're talking about remakes and classics, I get a little worried, because I feel like I said this when West Side Story came out last year. I was like, well, now almost every Best Picture movie that ever won is like, it's like completely open for everyone to remake. So yeah, they're going to remake All Quiet on the Western Front, But then what's stopping them from doing like The Sound of Music? What's stopping them?
That's coming. That's going to happen.
Like,
I
exactly.
guarantee that.
Like that's going to be coming. They're going to, they're definitely going to want to, I mean, they remade the Rocky, well, they've like added to the Rocky movies, but it's, it's adding to this franchise. I don't think they'll ever touch like The Godfather. Would they touch on The Waterfront? Like, is like that a movie that if that got remade, like
I'm saying they're going to remake The Godfather too. I guarantee.
Oh, if they, but like, I don't know. Like that's where my line gets crossed, and I'm okay with like the musicals getting remade, but I really don't want the dramas to get remade because like, fuck, if you read it all about like you redo All About Eve, you take away so much of like how great Betty Davis's performances in it and all the nuances with that. The Best Years of Our Lives. You can't remake that. How can you remake that movie with like any logic and think it's gonna be great? Then you look at the Shakespeare stuff on the other side, and Shakespeare, West Side Story obviously took from Romeo and Juliet, and Shakespeare has adapted his plays from tons of other stories. But like that's kind of okay, I feel like, to touch because it's so old. But I don't know. I can go on and on and go through every single movie. And it's just this like very weird state that we are in Hollywood because you're right. We're going to see a ton of remakes because everyone's excited for it. I mean, what was it? A few weeks ago, we saw these rumors about Wizard of Oz getting remade.
Yep.
Like, why would you touch that? Like, that's not like, what's the point? You're going to base it off the original. And that's the other thing that, these expectations of the remake compared to the original, like there's so much pressure and not everyone's Spielberg where it can like survive and it can really, survive and thrive off of that. It's going to be a mess. And that's why it's this huge problem because very rarely nowadays does Hollywood try anything new. And a movie that I think was very original and very new was like Everything Everywhere All at Once. Like that's a new movie that feels very like, oh my God, like that. I don't think that's been done before, but it's based off the idea of just a mother and daughter having a rocky relationship, and it's explored through multiverse and sci-fi, so that's like a great approach to it. I'm trying to think of like other new movies.
Even In the Heights is a great example of it being a musical, as being about New York City, being specifically about like a Latino community. Like, it's so funny that these movies came out in the same year when one is like an original, which is definitely an homage to this film and probably to the original stage play, and that they both come out in the same year. And one's like an original story, which does actually way better in terms of financials and in the box office than this remake did. So it is a weird, tricky kind of ground that we kind of were walking right now. And I do agree with dramas, it's weird. It's kind of odd to kind of remake a drama that's so critically remembered. But I think at the end of the day, we have to just know that the original is always going to be there. It's easy to say that too, because a lot of people may never watch the original of these movies. They'll just watch a remake.
But I think that's my problem, is that people are going to go, they're not going to say, oh, I'm going to watch the 1961 version. They're going to say, I'm going to watch the 2021 version of West Side Story because it's newer, it's flashier, it has the better camera movements, and it, it has Rachel Zegler in it. And I was going to say Ansel Elgort, but he's kind of has his own issues, which I don't know how they've survived with that. But anyways, I want to end this cold open with just this quote from Jerome Robbins, who was co-director of the West Side Story, and he was also a director and one of the originators of the original musical. So he said, West Side Story was a believable and touching work because of the special poetic conventions we evolved, conventions which were inherently theatrical. The problem is now to find a new set of conventions inherently cinematic, which will also convey the essence of a show whose essence is not in any of its separate elements, but in their organic unity. So I just want you to think about that, John, that quote, that idea of what Jerome Robbins, the original director choreographer of West Side Story, brought to the 1961 version. So let's wrap this all up, and let me ask you that age-old question, John. Is West Side Story worthy of the Best Picture Award of 1961?
West Side Story. Two youngsters from rival New York City gangs fall in love, but tensions between their respective friends build towards tragedy.
In New York City in 1957, two teenage gangs compete for control on the Upper West Side. The Jets, a group of whites led by Riff, brawl with the Sharks, Puerto Ricans led by Bernardo. Lieutenant Schrank and Officer Krupke arrive and break it up. The Jets challenge the Sharks to a rumble to be held after an upcoming dance.
Riff wants his best friend Tony, the co-founder and former member of the Jets, to fight at the rumble. Riff invites Tony to the dance, but Tony says he senses something important is coming. Riff suggests it could happen at the dance. Tony finally agrees to go. Meanwhile, Bernardo's younger sister Maria tells her best friend and Bernardo's girlfriend Anita how excited she is about the dance. At the dance, the two gangs and their girls refuse to intermingle. Tony arrives, he and Maria fall in love instantly, but Bernardo angrily demands that Tony stay away from her. Riff proposes a midnight meeting with Bernardo at Doc's drugstore to settle the rules for the rumble.
Maria is sent home. Anita argues that Bernardo is overprotective of Maria, and they compare the advantages of Puerto Rico and the mainland United States. Tony sneaks onto Maria's fire escape, where they reaffirm their love. Krupke, who suspects the Jets are planning something, warns them not to cause trouble. The Sharks arrive, and the gangs agree to a showdown the following evening under the highway, with a one-on-one fistfight. When Schrank arrives, the gangs fake friendship. Schrank orders the Sharks out and fails to discover information about the fight.
The next day at the bridal shop where they work, Anita accidentally tells Maria about the rumble. Tony arrives to see Maria. Anita, shocked, warns them about the consequences if Bernardo learns about their relationship. Maria makes Tony to promise to prevent the rumble. Tony and Maria fantasize about their wedding.
The gangs approach the area under the highway. Tony arrives to stop the fight, but Bernardo antagonizes him. Unwilling to watch Tony be humiliated, Riff initiates a knife fight. Tony intervenes, leading to Bernardo stabbing and killing Riff. Tony kills Bernardo with Riff's knife, and a melee ensues. Police sirens blare, and everyone flees, leaving behind the dead bodies. Maria waits for Tony on the roof of her apartment building. Her fiancé Chino, in a raged engagement, arrives and tells her what happened. Tony arrives and asks for Maria's forgiveness. He plans to turn himself into the police. Maria is devastated but confirms her love for Tony and asks him to stay.
The Jets and their new leader, Ice, reassemble outside a garage and focus on reacting to the police. Anybody's arrives and warns them that Chino is after Tony with a gun. Ice sends the Jets to warn Tony. A grieving Anita enters the apartment while Tony and Maria are in the bedroom. The lovers arrange to meet at Doc's, where they will pick up getaway money to elope. Anita spots Tony leaving through the window and criticizes Maria for their relationship with Bernardo's killer, but Maria convinces her to help them elope. Schrank arrives and questions Maria about the rumble. Maria sends Anita to tell Tony that Maria is detained from meeting him.
When Anita reaches Doc's, the Jets harass and even try to rape her, when Doc appears and intervenes. Anita angrily lies, saying that Chino has killed Maria. Doc banishes the Jets, gives Tony his getaway money, and delivers Anita's message. Tony, distraught, runs into the streets shouting for Chino to kill him too. In the playground next to Doc's, Tony spots Maria, and they run toward each other, only for Chino to shoot Tony. The gangs arrive to find Maria holding Tony, who dies in her arms. Maria stops the gangs from fighting, takes the gun from Chino, and threatens to shoot everyone, blaming their hate for the deaths. Schrank, Krupke, and Doc arrive, and the gangs form a funeral procession, with Maria following. The police arrest Chino and lead him away.
West Side Story is directed by Jerome Robbins and Robert Weiss.
West Side Story was written by Ernest Lehman, based on the play by Jerome Robbins and the book Arthur Lawrence, and uncredited writing to William Shakespeare.
Produced by Saul Chaplin, Walter Murish, and Robert Weiss.
Music by Leonard Bernstein and Irwin Kostal.
Cinematography by Daniel L. Fapp.
Film editing by Thomas Stanford.
Production design by Boris Levin.
And costume design by Irene Sharoff.
The West Side Story stars Natalie Wood as Maria,
Richard Bamer as Tony,
Russ Tamblyn as Riff,
Rita Moreno as Anita,
George Chakiris as Bernardo,
Simon Oakland as Lieutenant Schrank,
Ned Glass as Doc,
William Bramley as Officer Krupke,
and Jose De Vega as Chino. So, Ben, I want to start by asking you a question. And it sounded like...
Can we sing?
You can sing if you want to. I'm not singing. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me?
Oh, so you weren't going to ask me to sing. Okay. All right. I'll listen. I'll listen.
So you already talked a little bit about how you have some experience with this movie. I actually didn't know that you worked on a production of it. That's really cool to hear. I have almost the complete opposite interaction and introduction to this movie, and it probably came maybe like sixth or seventh grade, where I was like forced to watch this particular version of West Side Story in a music class. And I was thinking about this, and there's not many films, I think in general, there's not many that people are forced to watch. It's usually specifically in school where there's movies that you're forced to watch, whether you want to or not, whether it's a part of the curriculum or not. You know, obviously there's the holiday movies, every kind of holiday season that happens. But I was wondering personally, this is completely kind of off topic, but is there a movie that you have ever been like forced to watch, and whether that has changed your opinion of the movie, whether you've like come to liking a movie, whether it took you some time to kind of like the movie? Because West Side Story was a movie that I was forced to watch. One of those movies, since it's like almost 3 hours long, took about like 4 different classes to even get through. And because of being forced to watch a movie, there's almost like an inherent hatred to it. And this was like really, I was pretty young. I mean, this is early middle school, and just being forced to watch anything, plus you're a young boy being forced to watch a musical, like there's already inherent biases against musicals. I think you're just kind of like forced to kind of like poo-poo them as a young boy, trying to be like a manly boy who plays sports, right? All a bunch of stereotypes and all things I don't believe, but I always just found it interesting thinking about something that you're forced to watch, and then, you know, having to later on think about it, rewatch it, and kind of dig deeper into it. So is there a movie that kind of pops up in your head that you were forced to watch?
Not particularly. I was actually going to answer just with West Side Story, and I wasn't even forced to watch it. Movies that, I mean, was I forced to watch the Ten Commandments as a kid? No. Was it put on when? Yeah. You know, it was like one of those. Like, I don't think I was actually ever really like, is Star Wars, like, I don't remember the first time I watched it, because my dad spoiled the fuck out of it with me as a kid. Like, oh, Luke, I'm your father. And I'm like, oh, huh, like, what does that mean? And then as I grew up and realized, I was like, why'd you spoil that for me? Why not just let me experience that from my own? But anyways, I digress. That's a hard thing. I would really have to think about that. But I don't really think there were many movies that I was like forced to watch. But I do want to comment on like the West Side Story aspect of it. And I've talked about my grandparents a lot before. But in particular, I do think about my one grandma who could kind of convince me to watch the movie, and I don't really remember like why she convinced me to watch it. I think there was some reason why I brought up West Side Story to her, and she's like, "Oh, I love it. It's like my favorite." She loved it, and what she loved specifically was the idea of during G Officer Krupke that they would say "Krupp you," and she would always kind of pause. She would go like blank you, like kind of mouthing it to me, and I'm just like, what? And I was like, oh, they're trying to say like fuck you, and
Yeah.
it's just her whole like she loved that. And then watching this movie, and like just knowing that, like, so this is when this came out, it was a year after like my dad was born, so I'm just trying to think of my grandma like at a young age going with my grandfather to see this, although knowing them, they probably saw the original musical. I'm sure there's some West Side Story playbill that my dad has that they had kept from over the years. And just so like that, to me, like this idea that like this musical it feels like nitty gritty, because like my New York grandmother loved it, and she loved the idea that they use like "Krupp you," like "fuck you," and it's like so like ballsy as a musical. So that's where like my personal story comes in with it. So again, like I wasn't really forced to watch it, but I definitely grew an appreciation because of my grandma. And then, as I said before in the cold open, that like in my high school, like I was part of the production for it. So I know this, like, so going into this like movie in this episode, I was like, wow, I know this movie like so well. Like I have so much to say about it. And then, as I was just saying to you before, you know, as we were recording, kind of figuring out and planning, I was like, well, wait, I don't have like too much to say besides because the story everyone knows the story. It's Romeo and Juliet, right?
Yeah.
Like it's so common. Except this time it's whites and Puerto Ricans. But what I have to say, and what really grabbed me by the throat when I watching it again this time, and the times I have watched it, were the visuals of it. It's so visually stimulating, and you know, it's not even just like the shots of New York City from up above, and it's not even just all the dancing and the prologue. It's like the whole like minimalistic approach to the overture with just like the colors changing of New York City, like that screen that starts off the movie. Like that is such a big visual cue that to like kind of get you ready is to hear this music and have this like very artistic look to the screen. And so that's what really caught my attention was these like crazy visuals that were stunning and really were trying to engross you and bring you into the movie and into the story.
Yeah, I totally agree. I love the opening color frames and then the opening. I mean, the introduction to New York City is one of the coolest openings, I think, out of any of the films that we've watched so far. And for me, this film was kind of a struggle in the same way because, I mean, I haven't seen it nearly as many times as it sounds like you have, but I had to get through that struggle of kind of like always growing up disliking this movie because it was a movie that I was forced to watch, and I literally had never watched it since. And it was it was kind of a shock to watch it again because I was like, this movie's so well made. It's kind of stunning how just well the framing alone and the choreography alone is like unbelievable. And you're right, I felt the same way, but for me, this movie, because it's so simple in terms of the story it's telling, it's just executed so well that I think it stands out. For me, it was kind of the easiest way to break this down was to kind of look at the two movies with the remake, Spielberg's most recent remake in 2021, and use it as almost like a study on cinema and study on remakes. And I feel like that's kind of the way that they made the film and how they could change things, improve things, and kind of manipulate things around to see if it works for them or works for a modern era. And I totally think it does. I think it works really well, and I think there's some things that work better in the remake and some things overall that work in the original film better. I guess just right off the top, because we're going to be talking about specific things, and I probably won't be able to kind of help myself and compare it to the remake. Do you prefer this original versus Spielberg's remake?
I think I do prefer this one a little bit more because I've seen it more
Mm-hmm.
often, and
Yeah.
I think again like the remake's great and it's fun. I definitely like it, but it doesn't have the same like appeal. And one of the things that I thought really stood out about the 1961 version is the fact that it tries to take a lot of those theatrical elements and put it into the movie, where Spielberg used the musical, but it was like, well, how can we do this grander? How can we make this more
Sure.
movie than musical? And that quote I read from Jerome Robbins in the beginning of the episode, he seems like they struggle with that how do we make this feel cinematic? But what really stood out was like the fact they used, like they basically took like all the dancing and they just put it in real life settings. You know, instead of just on a stage, it's all real life and very interactive, very physical. And I think that's why I appreciate it more. Now, if you were to ask me about the actual acting itself, the acting, I think I have to get to the 2021 version, because the pretty much when they're not singing or dancing in the 1961 version, the acting is atrocious. I really like. I don't think any, like, I know Rita Moreno and George Chakiris won for their supporting roles, but some of that I feel like is more just because of the physicalness that they brought to it, and like Rita
The
Moreno is probably
songs.
she's probably the MVP of the cast, but by no means do I think any of the actors in this movie was good. I
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I would go to the length of saying that they were just flat out bad. I think Richard Beymer as Tony he's kind of flat, but it almost fits his character, right? He's kind of like goofy, he wanting to escape, but
but that's like the thing that Spielberg does in his version, is that he gives Tony this background that like Tony, it doesn't necessarily mean, I don't know if they mean that he killed someone in the sharks, but he definitely kicked the crap out of somebody in the sharks. And
yeah, he almost killed someone. Yeah.
right, and so like that was kind of his, like, you know, his, what was eating his soul. Whereas in the 61 version, there's not really much. They're just like, oh yeah, Tony used to run with the Jets.
He's just
Tony,
over it. He's
yeah,
just over it. You know?
yeah, he's just
Yeah.
over. But if they had that element of like Tony has a dark past, then I feel like I would have liked it a little bit more. And Richard Beymer, like later on would say he wasn't happy with his performance, and he thought that Tony should have been rougher and tougher and more like the street kid. But the way that Robert Wise and Jerome Robbins kind of dealt with him was like, oh, you're just like more the nice guy and
Yeah.
more like a pretty face. And so Beymer like kind of felt that even while he was performing it, but I guess he didn't push it too hard. And the other thing when it comes to the acting is that a lot of them, and I think the only person who's not is or two people are George Chakiris and Rita Moreno, although I think some of hers got recorded over, but a lot of the singing is not them. It's other people who perform the singing. And I think like that, like, so you hear these beautiful voices and singing and all that, but then when you hear the dialogue, like, Natalie Wood isn't that convincing of a Latina to me. I think at times she even sounds German, like with her accent.
Yeah, the
And
accents are weird.
the accents are super bizarre. And then, so there's like that element. And then the final element of why I don't really like the acting or the casting choices is, or I shouldn't say I don't like the casting. I think Shakiris and Marina are great, but they also got very, like, what's the opposite of whitewash and not necessarily blackface, but like they had to like darken their skin. You know, Rita
Well,
Moreno, like, she's Puerto Rican, and they made her darker because they didn't think that she looked the right part of a Puerto Rican.
yeah,
When she, like, it's that's like the whole
she's
issue. And like
born
most
Puerto
of the
Rican. Yeah,
yeah, most of the Hispanic characters, most of the sharks, they're not Latin at all. George Chakiris has like a Greek, like Turkish background, and he's from America. He has no Latin in his body and in his blood, and so it's strange that a lot of this commentary from the movie and the idea of like, oh, everybody needs to come together and break down these racial divides also is very prevalent in their casting choices and what they did behind the scenes. Like, they still were very racist, and it's like, what the fuck, you're not even learning your own lesson, which is why
it's so bizarre.
it's bizarre. But that's why the Spielberg version, like, he really, it takes a lot to have a lot of Hispanic characters, and speaking Spanish too is a huge thing, because I know a lot of people are up in arms that there weren't subtitles for the Spanish speaking parts, but he's like, well, no, it's authentic to them. And I kind of wish that the original 61 version had some Spanish in it. If it had subtitles, if they did have it, but I think if they had some Spanish in it, it adds to the authenticity of the movie itself.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I remember hearing a quote from Spielberg who said, not showing subtitles during those scenes too kind of also takes away the English kind of dominance over the film, and lets these characters have their own language, and lets anyone who's bilingual or who knows Spanish get like an insider look and kind of relate to those characters more. I think that's definitely a huge part. But yeah, in terms of the face paint, it's so astonishing, and it's so distracting. I can't say this enough, that like them all being the same shade is so unnatural looking. It's disturbing almost, in a way. Not even disturbing that they made them do that, but like disturbing to look at, because it's so unnatural. Like, humans do not all look the same shade. Even a white person, Ben and I, do not look the same shade. We're just not. There's different complexions, there's different yellows and reds in your skin tone. Like, it is so jarring to see that in a movie. And I think we've seen it, but it's usually, around the world in 80 days, it's fast. Like, we go to a scene and everyone's the same skin color. It's like, okay, like, we know everyone's racist back then. They refused to hire the proper races. But in this, where it's like all of our main characters are like in groups together, I even found like the Jets to all have weird skin tones. Like, for some reason they wanted them to be like really tan, I guess, because they're all outside. So like they all have a really similar complexion as well. I don't know if you've noticed that.
Oh yeah. No, I definitely,
it's bizarre.
yeah, no, I definitely did, and it truly does stand out. And to me, that's like, as great as the technical stuff, and I want to get into some of the technical stuff, is like the coloring of their faces is like bizarre. The makeup choices are bizarre. So it really makes no sense for the idea that this is supposed to be very inclusive, and the idea that we're going to break down stereotypes, we're going to break down walls. But do they really? So there's a number of ways we can go. I would love to talk about the technical stuff actually first, because that's like what makes this movie version a movie cinematic, is how they captured it all. And I love it. I think the cinematography is really great. It's grand. It sometimes can be a little static, but again, like, they're capturing all this movement with the characters dancing and bouncing around on the street. So incredible cinematography. I really got to give it a lot of credit there. The editing, though, is probably like the best part of this movie. It is experimental. There's so many moments, like there are moments where they use Vaseline on the film to kind of like block everybody else out, but to have like just Tony and Maria like looking at each other. There's a lot of transitions that they play around with. Like, there's one with Maria spinning and dancing around, and there's these red, greens, and blues like versions of her, like almost like holographic, like bouncing off her. Like, that's like really crazy innovative. Before the rumble, there's this fence that they use as a transition point that's just all red, and then it fades into the rumble. It's very like out there, and it's so different compared to what we have been seeing in previous movies. Like there wasn't like editing like this, and so I really appreciated like this time around. And it seems like Jerome Robbins was like kind of the motivator to have these like fantastical kind of edits and transitions. And to the next point with that is that he was so hands on in like the choreography of it, and he was like kind of pushing the cast to its limits, and he got fired like kind of like midway through the production because he was going over budget. He was taking so many like retakes of these huge choreography scenes. He was responsible for the prologue, Cool, America, and then I think there's one more song that he did. I'm forgetting off the top of my head right now. But the fact that like that then Robert Wise had to take over, and he kind of just brought the film back while still holding these like intentions that felt like that Robbins had, because he wanted to make it cinematic. He wanted to get theatrical elements and make it into film, really stands out. So I just wanted to take that quick second just to say like the technical elements, amazing. Probably not the coloring, and the sound at times sounds very tinny. There's some very weird echoes in the sound design, but that's it for my technical stuff. I'm ready to sing.
So, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I find it really interesting that you can almost tell in the movie when he leaves, because I think there's a lot less dancing. It's a lot like it's not nearly as big. There's not nearly as large choreographic like movements and interactions. Even the fight scene, the rumble later on, is not nearly as well choreographed as the opening fight scene, which I think we definitely should talk about. And I think this is another thing that was kind of challenging for me, and it still is challenging for me, is the opening fight scene. We get such a cool introduction to the world, whether it's the Spielberg version or the 61 version here, where we have all these beautiful shots of the city, and we're slowly getting we're getting closer and closer to the West Side. And we get to the point where it transitions into a musical. We hear the snaps, the iconic snaps. Like, it's hard to think about snaps without thinking about this iconic scene and just jumping around. But there is something about the fighting and the dancing, and really them using the dancing as a way to show fighting without really showing the fighting, has always just been something that just has always grinded against me. It's so weird, because there's some musicals that I love that are just filled with dancing, but something about taking a tough gang and making them like skip and jump and like jump over each other and snap, I just don't buy it. It's just so goofy and weird to me that like it just goes too beyond believing. And that's what musicals are, right? You're singing to someone, and that's really them expressing their biggest emotion, their most natural way to express to someone how much they love them. And this is the same way. They're taking fighting and they're making it dancing, and I get what they're doing, and I think it looks beautiful. All the choreography is absolutely amazing and so well done. It's just hard for me to buy. It's just something that I could never really get with for some reason.
Yeah, I totally hear that, and I think that I don't mind it so much, and I like it because it's that musical aspect to it. But then when I think about later Best Picture winners that are musicals, I think of The Sound of Music. There's not these big choreography moments, and it feels more like a film than an actual like, hey, here's a musical that's being put on film. Whereas
Sure.
this feels very intentional, that we're gonna take these musical aspects of it, that we're gonna take this choreography that is very iconic from the stage and put it on film. So yeah, it seems goofy because when they kick, they do like these like jump kicks, and it's very like flowy, and it's really good, and it's well coordinated. But it kind of takes away that element, like, oh, are these tough guys? Are they not? But then it also gets into gender dynamics and
fluidity,
and what
which is it's part of the movie too, right? Like that's very much a part of the movie.
Yeah, that part is with the character anybody's, and it's interesting. It's interesting, the idea of the rough and tumble guys, but then they're also dancing, and they're expressing that through dance. And I think that's just very intentional. It's very, but I can understand that idea of like, well, how am I supposed to believe it if like they're just sashaying a thing? Is that a word for dance? I can't dance. All I do is fist bump.
It is one of those things where I'm like, this is beautiful. It looks awesome. It's so well made, and I love all the the primary colors that they use in the 1961 version and how bright it is. And it's part of the reason why I think I like the fight scene in Spielberg's version a little bit more. It's more grimy, it's dirty. They actually fight a lot more in the 1961 version. Like, they finally get to the point where they're about to fight, and then it's kind of like more running away, more jumping over each other, and then they get to a fight in the kind of basketball court area before they get interrupted by Krupke and the detective. But it's like not really a fight. They're just kind of grabbing each other and kind of moving each other around. It's a very 1960s style fight, right? There's not even like punches thrown. So it's just a little bit hard for me to believe that they're actual gangs, where in the new version it's pretty violent. I mean, they're pretty like aggressive. There's a nail through a character's ear. Like, it's a lot more and rough and dirty, where it makes me feel like these are actually tough guys. These are actually people that can kill people and cause harm in a real way, which I just don't really feel that in this 1961 version. And I think there's a bit of a difference in Schrank's character as well. I think in Schrank's character in the 1961 version, it's so... He's pretty one note, right? He's just this guy who basically is tired of this. He doesn't want to deal with all the mayhem. And there's not as much in the 61 version as there is in the Spielberg version, where we have like a siding that Schrank has, where on the Jet side, he's like, all right, you guys are like the whites. I understand your point of view. I really want you guys to win. And I found that like an interesting change to his character, where it adds obviously more dimension to his character, but it also has a realistic feeling where even criminals that are white have like a higher past than any sort of other race, right? And there's always kind of like an allegiance that people have with their specific race that always kind of gets overlooked. And while Schrank doesn't want any crime to actually happen, he's obviously going to side with the Jets in the Spielberg version over in the 1961 version, where he's just like over it. He's just a detective. He's like, I'm here. You guys are so annoying. I hate that you even exist. Let's move on. Like, let's just get this over with before the neighborhood's gone, right?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of that. And again, I think that's like intentional. And that's the point of having Schrank, because it's the systematic, racism that's involved in police force and all that. And it's actually highlighted in America. And that song, there are a few lines. So one of Bernardo says, lots of doors slamming in our face. Another line says, better get rid of your accent. And then all the boys say in response to the girls, if you're all white in America, because they say life is all right in America. If you're all white in America. So there's, so that like those are in the songs, like lyrics. So like it, and that is why like I have the issues with the fact they didn't have so many Latin characters or Latin actors playing these characters, is because the music is literally there saying like, don't whitewash, like don't do this, and yet we're still doing that in these versions. So it's mind blowing, to have that the originators did that and did it with this movie. So we've talked a little bit about the technical side, the choreography, and the acting, but let's get into some of the numbers. I feel like that's the biggest way that we can kind of talk about this movie. So we talked about the intro and the prologue. Is there any? I don't think there's anything we haven't hit on from that.
No, I think we hit it all. Yeah.
Cool. So we hit that. When you're a jet from your first cigarette to your last dying days. Great. That's just a great line.
There's some great writing. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a really great song. Russ Tamblyn really shines in that one. The next big song or moment for me is the dance. The dance scene it's a pretty lengthy scene, but
yeah,
there's the dancing of that is incredible with how the sharks and the jets dance with but against each other. There's this very rocker 1950s Elvis feel to the jets, but the sharks have this suave Latin kind of very smooth flowy movement within theirs. So it's interesting to see those battle, but then also come together at points when the people at the school try to get them to dance together. And then that's also where Tony and Maria meet. And that's also kind of the point of the movie where I'm like, no, I care more about Riff and Bernardo's kind of whole back and forth versus Tony and Maria. I know they're the stars of this, or supposed stars of the musical, but this is where they kind of take full force. So the dance scene, any big things stand out to you coming from that number?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's so red. This movie loves the
Oh,
color
yeah.
red. It's just so primary red. The entire room is painted red. And also we have the amazing transition to the dance in the gymnasium, which you kind of hinted at earlier, where Maria just is spinning in the dress shop, and she just turns like her aura basically turns red, and everything's just trippy, and it's 60s trippy vibe, and it transitions us to everyone dancing in the red gym. And aesthetically it's like, whoa, it's so far out there that like we've never seen. Some of the editing, the transitions, some of even the look and feel of the film feels so beyond what we've seen in the 50s and the 40s and going back. And it was definitely vibrant and bright, and I love the dancing. I wish that, again, the opening was an actual fight, because this dance scene does, I think, exactly what the opening scene does, which shows you their cultural differences and how they are so different purely just based on their movement and their actions, which I really love. And it's incredible dancing and choreography here as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because it is the same kind of narrative, the same kind of intentions for what they do in the prologue and in the dance scene. And yeah, I can totally see like maybe there should have been more fighting, and I guess like the idea is that they were like through the dancing were fighting,
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas
yeah.
literally during the dancing they're fighting through dancing.
Yeah, exactly.
So so that's like it's a good setup. It's a huge scene, a lot of reds. There's one note that I found that was interesting. The school, like the teacher, I think it might be even a social worker, that kind of like gets them all to like dance with each other, the Sharks and the Jets. That's John Astin, who is Sean Astin's dad. Sean Astin, Samwise Gamgee from Lord of the Rings.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's like he was in there. And I saw another note that the Macaulay Culkin and his brothers, Kieran Culkin, their dad was a kid in the opening scene playing basketball. The Jets kind of like bully a little bit.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Like really fascinating, really like odd coincidences. So there's that little tangent right there. Anyway, so the dance scene happens, and then my favorite number.
Before you move on, I just wanted to talk about Tony and Maria meeting.
Oh,
and
yeah.
You talked about, that's the scene where you were talking about them using
The Vaseline.
Yeah, I almost said KY jelly. Very different than the Vaseline.
Very different.
Which I found very interesting. I mean, it's bizarre in the way it looks, because it's funny coming from our point of view so far in the future, and we can open up our phone and open up Snapchat or even open up Zoom, what we're talking on right now, and blur our background instantly and have us keyframed out perfectly, our entire background's blurred out. But for them, they had to physically take a print out and like rub jelly over to make things blurred. And you can see those like not perfect lines, but you can see kind of what they're attempting and what they're trying to do. And the way that they're almost like consciousness and their love for each other, which is this is such a love at first sight kind of movie, where it's like if you don't buy it, like the movie doesn't work, whatever. I've gone on so many tangents about that as well, but I found it really romantic the way they fade away together. Like they start dancing together and it sort of just fades into black, where they kind of are then separated from everyone else. While the remake is, I think cinematically it looks stunning from the technology, all the stuff that we have, and
those lens flares.
Yeah, he loves his lens flares in this movie, and it's really astonishing. And that's a big thing that I found so different, is that the colors in the remake are so muted compared to the original bright primary colors. But Spielberg really loves to add the color with his lighting. Like a lot of the color from the dance scene in the remake is blue and red, and that all comes from these big bright lights that are constantly, shooting off all these crazy lens flares. And I really loved in the remake the way they just kind of transitioned to under the bleachers, because we've all had moments, I think, where we snuck under bleachers, where whether we were like trying to kiss a girl, we kissed a girl, or whether me and a bunch of friends were just trying to sneak under the bleachers. So I really loved that moment in the remake as well. It's kind of hard to compare the two, because this is where it's like you can really see the technical differences between the two movies.
Oh yeah, 100%. Like that certainly stands out. That in the remake, where again the lens flares, the editing, like the camera movements, the way that like it's static in the dance scene in the 61 version, but in the 2021 version it's very immersive and very gets the camera in with the dancing. So you got to give Spielberg credit there for blending the two. So yeah, the dance scene is huge. It's fun, it's energetic, it really gets you going. And again, like I care more about Riff and Bernardo and that tension that gets built. And then it transitions to what you would call in Romeo and Juliet the balcony scene, because now
Hmm.
Tony is going to find Maria and finds her on her fire escape, so this is my favorite musical number is Maria. I've actually the last like 2 weeks I've had that song on my Spotify on repeat, and I've just been singing like Maria. I just met a girl named Maria. I can't even sing like that, but I love the lyrics in this, and you know he. I just want to read it. So, Maria, I've just met a girl named Maria, and suddenly that name will never be the same to me. Maria, I've just kissed a girl named Maria, and suddenly I found how wonderful a sound can be. Maria, say it loud, and there's music playing. Say it soft, and it's almost like praying. Maria, I'll never stop saying Maria. And like, I'm getting chills just saying that, and it just brings back so many memories. Like I remember sitting, behind the stage during my high school's production of it, and hearing it being sung, and I was just like, oh my god, like this is really, it's romantic. It adds so much to like the idea. What was it in? No, it's in Romeo and Juliet. What's in a name? I think Juliet says that because she's saying like, what's in a name about being a Capulet versus a Montague type of thing.
Hmm.
So like, what's in a name? Maria. It's everything in a name. It's everything that I could want in a world. I can't get it out of my head. And so like, I love that. I love that idea. And yeah, it's kind of goofy because they just met. They met maybe for 5 seconds, and they were madly in love. They were talking about marriage. They were talking about running away together and all this. It's teenagers falling in love. But I think just the sentiment and the idea of like in a name, when you find someone that's special, like you can't get it out of your head, and it's such like a wonderful sound. And I just love it. I love that song, and I love how Tony is singing it in the 61 version, and he's looking for her, and he finds her in the balconies, and just really beautiful moments right there for him.
Yeah, it's absolutely beautiful. It's like a lot of emerald green, this beautiful green color throughout those scenes. And I really relate. I mean, as much as I've always talked about on this podcast how I hate really sped up romances and just sped up relationships, especially when they're like madly in love and want to run away together, like you said, there's something to this where before they get to like talking on the balcony and they get to just show how madly in love they are, just him like longing for her, like wanting to see her again, even just saying her name just brings him happiness. And that I think sparked a chord with me where I met my girlfriend in a mailroom on our college campus, and we didn't like exchange numbers right away when we met each other, but there was like a spark there when we first met each other in the mailroom, and it wasn't like we flirted back and forth. There was just like an instant connection that's like really hard to explain. Like we both obviously didn't even know that much. We didn't know anything about each other. We just like felt the initial attraction and love. And I mean, love is a huge word that we didn't really know each other at that point, but there's something there that like it's hard to explain. And I think that's why musicals are so beautiful. There's something that is so hard to explain, but he does. He puts it in words, and he puts it specifically in her name by just showing how much that means to him and how that name will never be the same is, I think, an absolute beautiful line to kind of put in that song and to show how he's so changed by just looking at someone and the way they just lock eyes and connect instantly. It was something really touching.
It's so touching and so beautiful. And then what it leads to is my second favorite song of the entire musical, which is Tonight. And this is again like Tony and Maria are going back and forth. Like Tony's trying to be like, the smooth, like, oh, I'm a white boy coming on your balcony, and she's like, no, my parents will find you, and this and that. And then they get into Tonight, and again, the lyricism is so beautiful, and I wish I could sing it and do it justice, but they say tonight the world is full of light with suns and moons all over the place. Tonight, the world is wild and bright, going mad, shooting sparks into space. Today, the world was just an address, a place for me to live in, no better than all right, but here you are, and what was just a world is a star tonight. And again, I'm getting chills just saying it. And then the ultimate chill factor, and this is, I think, my favorite shot of the entire movie of the 61 version is it's this low angle shot of Tony looking up at Maria while she's on the balcony, and they're singing to each other. They say, good night, sleep well, and when you dream of me tonight. Oh, I'm chilled right now, like thinking about it. Like it's such a great shot, and when it's this swell and this build up, and you're like, oh my god, I love that they're in love, and I love this. I want like more of that. And then what's so unfortunate is the movie kind of for me from there, like it doesn't go like totally down, but it starts to go like gradually. Like Krupke is like a nice like number. The quintet version of Tonight, when it's kind of like halfway point, but then it starts to kind of go down a little bit from there. But what two like huge numbers to have back to back between Maria and Tonight in the film.
Absolutely, yeah. I love the way they tie Tonight later on, and everyone's getting ready for Tonight, and the women don't really know how the Rumble's actually happening and what's really going on, and the men are preparing for the Rumble. It's so intense and wild. Krupke is a goofy song. It's almost like unnecessary, really, for the film. It just kind of gives another musical number. It's another fun, flashy dance. That's a musical number that I think that actually I prefer in the Spielberg version. It's in a different like placement in particular, and
Yeah,
it's
like in a
inside the
police
courthouse.
station.
Yeah,
But
in the police station. Yeah, exactly. And it's placed I think a little bit better, and it's in a better location. We talked a little bit about America, but what a weird choice to put that on a rooftop and just like put it in the darkness, where it's a great song. I'm not gonna deny anything about the song. It's great, and there's some great dancing on that rooftop. But comparing it, because I'm gonna keep comparing it to the remake, it's like night and day with the remake on how big and lavish, and it's all outdoors. It's kind of very similar to In the Heights opening number, where it's all bright and colorful. I think it does such a better job of showing Puerto Rican life and the day-to-day, and just how vibrant and how much they add to the community in New York. And compared to the original, where it's just in at night, it's still the same night that Tony's meeting Maria, and it doesn't work as well as in the remake for me personally. But yeah, moving on, I guess we could get to the Rumble before we get to the remaining songs and talk about the fight, and what do you think about the fight. And really, it comes down to, obviously, Tony's there. He's trying to stop the fight. He wants it to be over. But it's really Riff, played by Russ Tamblyn, who's kind of the lead here. He's the one who's initiating the fight, trying to kill Bernardo directly. I personally, if there's a character I hate the most in this movie, it's Riff. And I don't think it's the character itself. I think it's the performance of Russ Tamblyn, which, God bless him. I'm sure he had some great roles in his life, but I just can't stand his performance in this movie. I think he's like the most distracting. I think he's very frustrating. I think from a character point of view, because he keeps putting people in danger. Obviously there's that, but I just like didn't buy his performance at all. I thought he was by far the worst in terms of his acting performance. I didn't really buy his toughness at all. I couldn't really see this like little like scrawny guy being a tough leader of a gang. I felt like from the very casting of Riff, I just didn't buy him at all. But it seems like you like his performance here.
Yeah, he's probably like my third favorite. Like if I had to rank it, I would go Anita, Bernardo, then Riff. In terms of characters that I liked in their performance, his dancing is incredible in this movie.
Yeah,
and he even said
he was a dancer, I think. Right?
Yeah, and Russ Tamblyn, he told a story about how Fred Astaire came up to him and complimented him on his dancing, which is just absolutely fantastic. So I love Russ Tamblyn. I think he does have some of that toughness. So I kind of disagree with that against your points. But is it like a great performance? No, like none of these are like great performances. But I thought like I really liked him, but he does make some pretty shitty decisions for the Jets.
He makes some really shitty decisions, and I think he's got some pretty awful line reading here and there. But I do agree, his dancing is unbelievable, and there's a reason why he's in the forefront, in the center of the gang throughout the opening fight scene. There's a lot of reasons, and that specifically seemed to be why he was casted and why he really got the role here. I just didn't buy him. But moving back to the Rumble, I just wanted to hear your thoughts. I mean, we don't have to compare the two too much. I know we're mainly focusing on the 1961 version here, but what did you think of their fight? Their little kind of stabby. We get Tony getting hit. We get him trying to hold back, but he still can. He's got to go and fight Bernardo anyway. They kind of have to break that conflict because of him dating Maria. What did you think of the fight, Ben?
Yeah, I thought it was well choreographed between like when Bernardo is going after Tony and Riff and him, and the two of them going back and forth. But my real question and what I want to talk about is it just what Tony did? And Tony kind of justifies it as it's like this fit of like white hot rage that he was so angry at the idea that Riff was killed that he had to kill back. And that's where I was talking about with the knowing Tony's background in the Spielberg version, we know that Tony had this like kind of hot-headed side of him because he beat the crap out of somebody. But in this one, it's like, wait, Tony, you're a nice guy. Why did like all of a sudden, why are you the only one who's pissed that Riff died? Like none of the other Jets came in and went to go stab Bernardo. And it's one of those moments where like, I know it's a movie, it's drama, it's based on Romeo and Julia. That's what happened. Between, what was it, Mercutio and Tybalt, I think are the two characters. Regardless, I just like, that's where like my mind goes. I'm like, was Tony like, should he have done that? Like they probably would have gotten this, like he probably could have gotten Bernardo arrested, gone to Maria, slept with Maria, married her, and been like, fuck you, Bernardo, and then be done with the entire thing. But no, he had to let his white male rage get the best of him, and he was seeing red, literally, because Bernardo was wearing red, and he just killed him.
Yeah, he's a bull. He just saw red and had to attack. No, it's one of those things where, yeah, it's a movie. I mean, he's got to attack, and he's got to like kind of push us into the third act, and it's frustrating, that's for sure. I don't really think you really buy that he is that kind of tough. You don't really buy that he would even try to kill someone, let alone just full on stab them in the heart. But it's there. I mean, it's so fast and jarring the way it happens. He just kind of like jumps at him after he's so angry about Riff, and it just causes an all-out scatter. Everyone panics and kind of like breaks out and runs away. It felt like this film, and this is probably the difference of direction, it felt like this should have been such a bigger scene in terms of a bigger choreographed fight. Like there is some back and forth and some fighting. I just thought it would be bigger just based on purely the opening fight scene. I thought it would kind of evolve and be a little bit bigger.
I think the only thing I wanted to mention, and it's so tiny, is the spotlight that follows Tony after is so goofy. Like that's like one of those goofy moments where it takes you out of the movie. You're like, come on. Like how, like he's like hiding against the wall. He's like, oh, like trying to plaster himself like flat against it. It's like, clearly he can see you. Just fucking run, you idiot.
He's trying to hide.
And this is something I always get into with movies, musicals, and all that, is like they'll take like a short, like a small amount of space and make it seem like they're running for miles. So isn't that moment where like Tony's like hiding and getting away from the spotlight, like is he supposed to be like going, is that supposed to be a ton of space he's covering? I don't know. But
probably. What's so interesting, and I think this is maybe one of the biggest changes besides the character of Doc in the remake, is that I Feel Pretty, which is one of the next big songs that we really haven't talked about, it appears after the fight. So in the remake, the fight happens, the rumble happens, the both of these characters die, and then we immediately cut to Maria with Anita, and they sing I Feel Pretty, and it's supposed to be this really heartbreaking scene where she doesn't even know that her brother just died and her husband just died, and they're just kind of enjoying the moment, feeling like alive, and she's so madly in love. Where in the 1961 version, we have I Feel Pretty coming way earlier in the film, right? It's after they meet, it's before the rumble, it's after the America song, but it just feels so much better to me to have it before the actual rumble. So what do you feel about the change that then they put it after the actual rumble, and it's supposed to be jarring intentionally, but how do you feel about that specific change? Because that's one of the biggest changes they made, really.
Yeah, it's bizarre. It's a little weird because again, like what you're saying, it's supposed to kind of juxtapose like I Feel Pretty versus like the rumble where there's death and there's, I was gonna say destruction, but there's not really destruction, but just like the idea of like prettiness and ugliness and the juxtaposition of that, like that is very fascinating and interesting. And actually I Feel Pretty is my introduction to I Feel Pretty was from you ever seen the
Anger
movie?
Management?
Yeah, that's the best
iteration of I Feel Pretty.
Yeah, just seeing Jack Nicholson going, what mirror where
what mirror where. Yeah, I literally only hear the two of them singing when I think of I Feel Pretty. You're absolutely right.
Linda, there. What what?
Adam, and it's so funny because like the way Adam Sandler sings is always that really goofy, high pitched voice. So it's so funny that he can kind of like balance him.
I feel
with
pretty. Oh,
yeah,
so pretty.
balance him so well. It's amazing. Watch that movie, Anchor Management, if you haven't seen it. Probably so offensive looking
It's
back
so-
on it now. But man, that movie's hilarious.
Yeah, it's funny. But even there, I want to just not trying to harp on Natalie Wood too much, but like even in that song, I'm like, you sound not Hispanic. Like, and I know it was Marnie Nixon who was doing her singing voice, but it's like, was anyone even trying to do like just a normal, just like we don't need an accent, just sing it, and it's very bizarre. But
Yeah.
that's actually not one of my favorite numbers. So I Feel Pretty happens, the Rumble happens, and then pretty much after that, the Rumble, that's where the movie is like, there's like what, 50 minutes left after the Rumble in the 61 version, and I'm like, that's the part of the story in the musical too, where I'm just like, let's speed this up, like let's get this going, because I don't like Cool. It's like this, the choreography of Cool is good, but I don't really care too much about the rest of the Jets at that point. You know, I care more about if in the moments where like, oh my God, like Chino's after Tony, let's go find Tony and protect him from Chino. Like that's fine. But the whole Cool, like it's more for the choreography that moment. But the music isn't great for me. And then A Boy Like That, I Have a Love, like I don't really like that song too much, but that's also what leads to Maria and Anita's like, riff against each other, and then she sends
so
Anita
funny.
to go grab Tony. And then that's probably where like I want to talk about is like the lead up to the end is Anita does this very selfless act. Her boyfriend Bernardo, her love, is dead, and then she's willing to help Maria to get Tony out of hiding and go to Doc's shop. And then what she's met with is essentially what leads to Tony's death. And it's the hate, it's the cruelty, it's the racism within the Jets and that community, because they see Anita, they don't see a person trying to help Tony, they just see a Puerto Rican. And so it's what they do to her by attacking her and like attempting to rape her. And even Rita Moreno said like I guess she was sexually assaulted when she was younger, but she brings up like how that brought up such bad memories and the feelings that she got. So it's very emotionally effective with the idea of like all these guys just ganging up on her. And then out of rage, she's like, well, no, Maria's dead. Go tell your friend Tony that. And then that leads to Doc telling the Jets to get out. And then he tells Tony that, that Maria's dead. And then Tony runs out. He's going, Chino, come after me, Chino. And then he sees Maria, and then boom, he's dead, and it leads to the very dramatic ending.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about the scene. I'm gonna say and have to compare it to the remake because it's very integral to Doc's character, who's now a completely different character called Valentina in the remake version. I also don't let me forget, I want to get back to A Boy Like That because that's actually my favorite song in this whole musical, and you just skipped over it so disrespectfully. And I'll get back to that in a second.
Thumbs down.
It is, it's probably because you're mainly thinking of the 1961 version here. Okay,
Yes.
I'll go into it real quick. The 1961 version of A Boy Like That, it kind of sucks in compared to the remake, I got to be honest, because, and I know we've been talking so much about Marino, but her performance is just not good in a lot of this movie. I just flat out will say that. And her performance in A Boy Like That just makes no sense. Like, she just found out that her husband is dead, that her good friend, who's the sister of her husband, also lost her brother.
Boyfriend, but yeah.
Oh, it's boyfriend. Thank you
Yeah.
for correcting me. I keep thinking
They're all
that they're married.
teenagers. They're all like supposed to be 16, 17 years old.
Which it just doesn't feel like it when you talk about Anita and Bernardo's character at all.
No.
Especially in the remake, they feel so old. But in the 1961 version, like there's like not even like pain or anger. It's like she's blank. And then until she sees that Tony is leaving Maria's room, and then it's like she ignites and is like, what the hell are you doing? Like, did you not learn anything? Like, and then she goes off and sings the song. But it's like, where is the anger? Where is the rage? You would be fuming. You would be so angry and upset. And when you watch the remake, it's like this incredible performance, and she would go on to win the Best Supporting Actress again. But like, it is such a better performance, and it's so much more dynamic and just like fiery. It's an amazing song in the remake, and I think it's just so underutilized in the original, and it's probably why you don't really like it in the original so much. But I just absolutely love it because it's taking Anita's character, who's been really the positive one. She's been trying to like inspire Bernardo. She's been trying to lift people up by saying, like, you know, America's not perfect. It's definitely racist. It's filled with a lot of bad things, but there's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of things to love about America. And she's like that golden light for Bernardo, and he gets killed. And she almost like loses that entirely. And now she's at the point of like pure frustration because her own flesh and blood essentially is completely trading by dating the person, and not even dating, but now sleeping with the person that killed her boyfriend. So it's just like this heartbreaking moment in the film that I just don't think is really sold by Marino at all until we get to like the actual singing, which again is not even her, unfortunately. I just thought it was so much better done in the remake, and there's so much passion, and like she's crying throughout the entire singing performance. It's so dramatic and just wonderful. Had to get to that. But moving on to Anita's attack. Sorry, I'll let you speak. I don't want to cut you off.
No. I mean, I've been trying to like consciously like not do too much of and we talked about this, about like I'm not trying to compare the two because we're trying to review the 61, and yeah, you're right. The 61 version is not really, it's not as compelling as what they bring in the 2021 version. But that's also like, again, the idea of remakes is that what can we do now? Like, how can we enhance it now than what we couldn't do before? And I don't know if acting is better nowadays, but technology is better. So you can do so much more and do so much with the depth of the visuals that it kind of helps with what's going on. Whereas like in this version, there's some dynamic lighting, but a lot of it is kind of flat. It's kind of just like supposed to be captured from all angles. It feels very musical.
It's like high key lighting.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not my favorite, but I guess it's more from the 61 version because of that. So yeah, so the movie, Anita gets attacked. She tells us Tony, again, I was saying, what goes out, it's like, Chino, come find me. Sees Maria, he gets shot, and then he dies in her arms. So that's kind of where the difference between this one and Romeo and Juliet is, because Juliet lives. And I actually think that Natalie Wood's performance in this moment is really good because she brings so much emotion to the character, to the moment, that it's sort of hard to not feel like it's like lump in your throat, like, okay, yep, Tony's dead. Maria's, you kind of get that. And she said, and the lines that she ends this with, it is so good. She says, all of you all killed him and my brother and Riff, not with bullets or guns, with hate. Well, now I can kill too, because now I have hate. And and that's what this whole, again, that the social commentary of it is, like, there's so much hate that you can kill. Like, it doesn't matter what the differences are. If you're just going to hate, then hate is just going to trump over everything else. And then the movie ends with like this like funeral procession where like the Jets and Sharks lift Tony's body together. And what I really like about the ending is they all, like, everyone kind of walks off separately. And when you see it on the stage, it's even more haunting. It's like hauntingly like beautiful, because it's very ominous. Like these, like, I'm pretty sure they're minor notes from the score. It's just very like these like drony kind of vibes and sounds to it, and every character just walks off, and it's just like, oh, like, really, this had to happen? Like, no, Tony could have lived, and this and that. And the movie ends on such a down note, but it's still so emotional and dramatic that you're like wiping away tears from watching it.
Yeah, there's the deleted scene of all the Jets carrying his body and just tossing it into the Hudson River.
My God.
Yeah, they cut that scene for unknown reasons, because it really killed the vibe of them just chucking his body into the water.
They just put it into a trash can.
Yeah, with like an old metal trash can, and they put the lid, his arms like hanging out the side of the trash can.
All the Jets and Sharks are like, well, that was dramatic.
And they all like start a bonfire in the trash can for his honor.
Sing Kumbaya.
Oh,
and
man.
then move down to the east side, and then it's all good.
Yeah, I really love the ending here. It's very heartfelt and touching, and it really is tragic. And I think it needs to be tragic because I think it needs to hit the audience with what the movie's going for and about not trying to like fight your differences and just accept the differences and just try to learn to grow with each other. And I found that really heartfelt and really touching. In terms of the actual full-on ending and the credits, we talked about the opening credits. They're freaking awesome. The opening scenes of introducing us to New York, but I love the ending credits in this movie, and it's one of the most unique and stylized end credits that we've seen out of any Best Picture winner for sure. The way that their names are just kind of displayed in graffiti, and we're just like slowly getting to another cast member or another crew member, and they're all just intermixed with all this graffiti and all this like gross city kind of texture. And it was such a cool, unique way to end a movie while, giving your credits, your standard credits. I thought it was super cool.
Yeah, I definitely like that too. It again adds the whole the style and the feel that Robbins and Wise were going for, and it really does pay off by the end because it's so unique, and it's not even just like the credits, but all the production design, the art direction. It's so intentional with all the graffiti and what's placed in the background. I could just watch the movie and just look for stuff in the background for contextual clues. So the idea they use graffiti and on the walls to kind of end it. I don't know if it's kind of like a commentary on like that's forever, like these names are like etched in stone kind of thing. Like this is a forever.
You can't take it down. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's great to even point that out. So I feel like we talked a lot about the movie, both movies. Is there any final thought from you, John?
Yeah, the last thing I'll end with it, because I've compared the two movies so much, probably way more than you wanted me to do, but I couldn't help myself. But I wanted to end by talking a little bit, and we don't have to go too deep into this, but the way Spielberg introduces the film in The Rubble, and it's not the same kind of similar introduction to the 61 version. He kind of just takes us right into The Rubble, and then we're kind of starting into the fight. And what I found interesting is that opening, there's a sign for the Lincoln Center and how this neighborhood that's being destroyed in the West Side is going to be replaced with luxury apartments and the Lincoln Center, which is a famous, iconic, actual performing theater in New York. And for us who've lived in New York for such a long time, I've been to the Lincoln Center. I find it so funny that like this movie is recognizing how it's destroying these people's homes and their lifestyle, yet that Lincoln Center is such an iconic place in New York now, and it's like a place known for film premieres. And I wonder if this particular movie even had its New York premiere at the Lincoln Center, and how weird and meta that actually is. I just found it a insider kind of New York thing that was really interesting, and to think about how I've been to that area a bunch of times. I've seen movies at the AMC that's right next to the Lincoln Center. It's just a weird little tidbit that I found so interesting in the remake.
Yeah, and I like that was included in the remake, was to show like what is going to be put there. And also at the time of the 61 movie, they didn't like, I think it was 62 or 63 when Lincoln Center was complete. So they wouldn't have even known like what was going to be there, the whole idea. And so I think that maybe they had an idea that all these people were being displaced, that they didn't really know like how, because it's a very bougie area now. It's
funny to think about gangs running around right in that area, right?
Well, it's also funny to think about, like, I'm sure people have done showings of the movie there.
Yeah.
And it's like, wait a second, we're here on the same grounds where it's like this whole battle and all these frustrations take place because of oh man, so many of what society brings, because of what people think is what theirs is theirs, but not really it's theirs, it's for everybody type of thing. So I think that's what makes this musical so universal, is it really is for everybody, and you can put any groups that are going against each other and you can put it within this story, within this context. And that's why it's been adapted so much, and that's why, like, even going back to Shakespeare, adapted it from an Italian poem like that. It's been over and over again, the story has been told. So that's West Side Story, but let's jump into the 34th Academy Awards.
The Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences presents its 34th Annual Achievement Award.
We've also learned that there's no contest in the selection of our Master of Ceremonies. So, once again, here's a member of our community who, like many of us, has a lovely family, a nice home, plays a fair game of golf, and manages to find work. He's just an average citizen, except that when you add his charm, his talent, and his warm heart, you've got the nicest guy in town when he manages to get back here. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Bob Hope.
Thank you very much, President. Wendell Corey, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Judgment at Santa Monica. Yes, here we are in Santa Monica for the real West Side Story. That's what I like about our industry. The big moment for Hollywood movies comes to you from Santa Monica on television. We're located just a few feet from the magnificent blue Pacific. In fact, we left the side door open so the cast of Mutiny on the Bounty could wade ashore. This is an exciting night, the moment we've all been waiting for. In just a few hours, the Dodgers' new ballpark will be open. No, this is the night when the entire nation's eyes are on Hollywood. The Kennedys even gave their travel agent the night off. This is the 34th Annual Academy Awards presentations. For you, the Academy Awards. For me, Shock Theater. But here I am again, giving out the Oscars and smiling. I'm something new, a method loser. No, I'm a two-time loser. This year, not only wasn't I nominated, on Hollywood Boulevard, they just put a manhole cover over my star. But my agent said, don't worry about not getting an Oscar this time. Remember, you're still young. That's the good thing about having a 95-year-old agent. West Side Story is about teenagers who carve each other up with switchblades. It's the best musical of the year. It's the first time I ever saw a gang war and came out whistling the tunes. Now, this past year, motion pictures got more and more mature. Today, children can go into a theater and see things they used to get their faces slapped for asking about. Let's start making the awards so I can have some new people to be bitter about.
The 34th Academy Awards were held on April 9th, 1962 at the Santa Monica Civic Auditorium in Santa Monica, California. The event was hosted by Bob Hope for the 13th time. The most memorable event of the night actually came from Stan Berman, a New York City cab driver who awarded Bob Hope with a homemade Oscar after he slipped through security and made his way to the stage. Let's listen to a little bit of that.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm the world's greatest gatecrasher, and I just came here to present Bob Hope with his 1938 trophy. Here you are, Bob. Stan Berman. This is for Bob.
We'll give it to him.
Who needs Price Waterhouse? All we need's a doorman.
Academy Honorary Awards. The Jean Hersholt Humanitarian Award went to George Seaton. The Irving G. Thalberg Memorial Award went to Stanley Kramer. And honorary awards went to William L. Hendricks for his outstanding patriotic service in the conception of writing and production of the Marine Corps film, A Force in Readiness, which has brought honor to the Academy and the motion picture industry. Another one went to Fred L. Metzler for his dedication and outstanding service to the Academy of Motion Pictures Arts and Sciences. And another honorary award went to Jerome Robbins for his brilliant achievements in the art of choreography on film. So we have two honorary awards I want to point out. One for Jerome Robbins, who was a co-director for West Side Story, who was ceremoniously fired because, let's be honest, he wasn't being a great director. He was falling behind schedule and getting over the budget and all that. And then another one went to the Irving G. Thalberg Award, went to Stanley Kramer, who produced and directed Judgment at Nuremberg. Both movies received 11 nominations that year. So just want to put that in your heads as we are talking about the 34th Academy Awards.
Best special effects went to The Guns of Navarone. Visual effects by Bill Warrington. Audible effects by Vivian C. Greenham.
Best film editing went to West Side Story to Thomas Stanford. This is Stanford's only career Academy Award win and nomination, and this film was ranked as the 38th best edited film by the Motion Picture Editors Guild in June 2012. We talked about this a little bit during our discussion. Film editing, very unique, very original, very experimental, and I think it's what makes the 61 movie shine, in my opinion.
Absolutely. There's such wonderful transitions here, and they feel very new and kind of the 60s, but they feel so fresh from everything that we've seen beforehand. And I just want to shout out The Parent Trap. The fact that The Parent Trap was nominated for anything is just... The fact that this came out the same year as The Parent Trap kind of blows my mind as well. So just a shout out to The Parent Trap. Best Costume Design Color goes to Irene Sharaff for The West Side Story. This is Sharaff's third of 5 total Academy Awards, and she was also the original costume designer for the stage version of The West Side Story. So I think we talked a little bit about the costume design. I enjoyed the primary colors. I feel like it's of the time, the 60s musical. We're getting into these kind of like bright, colorful musicals. It identifies the sharks and the jets. I think it's done very well. I think when we look back at it now, and even how much I compared it to the new remake, how subtle the remake has such subtle colors, but I just think it's of the time. It's of the era. I think it fits perfectly for how bright and colorful the movie is. And yeah, damn cool. I love how the sharks have a lot of that purple.
Yeah.
Like when they go to the dance, they have the purple suits and the purple ties. I love that.
Yeah, the color between the jets and the sharks is incredibly important because again, it differentiates the two. There's reds, purples is like fire energy for the sharks, and then for the jets it's muted a little. There's some like yellows and browns in this
and
version.
Blue, yeah.
Yeah, well, and blues in the more the Spielberg version, but so that's iconic. And the other iconic thing that you have to have in any West Side Story is the white dress with the red ribbon around it for Maria. So two very important elements. Moving on to Best Costume Design Black and White. This one went to La Dolce Vita to Piero Girardi. This is Girardi's first of 2 Academy Awards, and he would go on to win for Federico Fellini's 8.5 from 1963.
Best Cinematography Color went to Daniel L. Pfapp for West Side Story. This is Pfapp's only career win, and he was nominated for Desire Under the Elms in 1958, The Five Pennies, 1, 2, 3, The Unsinkable Molly Brown, Ice Station Zebra, and Marooned in 1969. So we talked a little bit about West Side Story's amazing cinematography. We didn't go too deep into Daniel L. Pfapp, but what a wonderful... It's just a beautiful film, and the combination of the choreography, the blocking, and the direction perfectly aligning with this amazing cinematography. I mean, it's amazing. It feels there's a lot of movement. There's so much energy to the actual cinematography behind West Side Story. It's absolutely worthy.
Best cinematography black and white went to The Hustler to Eugene Shuftan. This is Shuftan's only career Oscar win. So Shuftan invented the Shuftan process, which is a special effects technique that employed mirrors to insert actors into miniature sets. One of the early uses of the process was for Metropolis from 1927, a Fritz Lang film. The technique was widely used throughout the first half of the 20th century until it was supplanted by the traveling matte and blue screen techniques.
Best Art Direction Color went to West Side Story. Art direction by Boris Levin, set direction by Victor A. Ganglin. This is Levin and Ganglin's only Academy Award win. Ben, is there anything that you would like to add? We talked a lot about the look of the film, not too detailed of the sets and the art direction, but what did you think about West Side Story's art direction?
Yeah, I mentioned it a little bit before, and again, I just love the details in the background. I love the graffiti. I think that the sets all really work together, brings the musical to life and adds more to the backgrounds of it. So I liked it. I liked that they used real places in New York to dance on, which supposedly was murderous for a lot of the company because their knees were getting screwed up. They were wearing through shoes. Supposedly Jerome Robbins really put them through the process from having to dance on real sets or real places versus just a stage.
City streets, yeah. I think it goes a long way. I mean, you can see from time to time when it becomes a set, but I think it went a long way to not, make it like an American in Paris and just lock us down in a set that is not a real city. I think it did a lot to build and ground the world that we see here.
They weren't in Paris?
Oh, shit, really?
Moving on, Best Art Direction Black and White went to The Hustler, art direction by Harry Horner and set decoration by Gene Callahan.
Best Sound went to West Side Story, Gordon E. Sawyer and Fred Hines. This is Sawyer's third and final Academy Award, as he previously won for The Bishop's Wife in 1947 and The Alamo just last year in 1960. This is Hines' fourth of 5 total Academy Awards, including the previous wins for Oklahoma in 1955, the South Pacific in 1958, and The Alamo. The Gordon E. Sawyer Award is an honorary award given by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences to an individual in the motion picture industry whose technical contributions have brought credit to the industry. The award is named in honor of Gordon E. Sawyer, the former sound director at Samuel Goldwyn Studio and the 3-time Academy Award winner, who claimed that a listing of past Academy Award arranged both chronologically and by category represents a history of the development of motion pictures. It was first presented at the 54th Academy Awards in April 1982. The Gordon E. Sawyer Award is voted upon and given by the Scientific and Technical Awards Committee of the Academy. So Gordon E. Sawyer here made such a big impact that they eventually made an award for him, and it was first premiered in 1982 at the 54th Academy Awards. So it's such a big, astonishing achievement. I mean, there's not many people that get an award named after them, let alone an Academy Award. What a great achievement.
Yeah, it's huge, and I think we have to thank him for the idea of telling the Academy, hey, you should probably like record all of this and like document a lot of this stuff for people like us who are really into it. Moving on to Best Song, went to Moon River from Breakfast at Tiffany's, music by Henry Mancini, lyrics by Johnny Mercer. Mercer and Mancini wrote the song for Audrey Hepburn to sing in Breakfast at Tiffany's. The lyrics, written by Mercer, are reminiscent of his childhood in Savannah, Georgia, including its waterways. As a child, he had picked huckleberries in summer, and he connected them with a carefree childhood and Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn. Although an instrumental version is played over the film's opening titles, the lyrics are first heard in a scene where Paul, quote, Fred Varjak, played by George Peppard, discovers Holly Golightly Hepburn singing the song, accompanying herself on the guitar while sitting on the fire escape outside their apartments. There is an eruption of behind-the-scenes consternation when a Paramount Pictures executive, Martin Racken, suggested removing the song from the film after a tepid Los Angeles preview. Hepburn's reaction was described by Mancini and others in degrees varying from her saying, "over my dead body," to her using more colorful language to make the same point. So let's listen to Moon River.
Moon River, wider than a mile, I'm crossing you in style someday. Oh, dream maker, you heartbreaker, wherever you're going, I'm going.
So Moon River, John, have you seen Breakfast at Tiffany's? I don't know if I've ever asked you that question.
Yeah, I have. Moon River it's such a weird song, especially to win for that film. I mean, when we're just talking about a musical filled with great songs, and I'm curious what you think is the best song and what you think should have been nominated or even won best song in particular. I mean, Moon River is a beautiful song. It absolutely is really gorgeous. It's just it feels off that none of the music from West Side Story would win best song.
Well, that's kind of like it happens because it's based off of already existing source material where like this stuff is the best song is supposed to be like original material made for the movie.
Yeah.
So that's why, I mean, yeah, I would have loved if Maria or Tonight had been like nominated for it, but I love Moon River, and I like Breakfast at Tiffany's. It's funny that we talk about race and why it's so bad that what they did in West Side Story, because it almost seems like okay versus what they do with Mickey Rooney in Breakfast at Tiffany's, where
he's portraying an Asian man, right?
It is so offensive. It's so offensive. I don't think I've seen anything as offensive as that. I mean, I've seen pretty offensive things, but that is one of the most offensive things I've ever seen in a movie. So it kind of takes away a little bit from Breakfast at Tiffany's for me, but that song it's very beautiful, and it's a movie that I think I gotta like watch again to appreciate more. But I think I'll skip through the Mickey Rooney parts.
Best scoring of a musical picture goes to West Side Story. Saul Chaplin, Johnny Green, Sid Raymond, and Erin Costal. This is Chaplin's third and final Academy Award, and he won previously for An American in Paris and Seven Brides for Seven Brothers. This is Johnny Green's third or fourth Academy Awards, and he won for Easter Parade and American in Paris. This is Costal's first of 2 Academy Awards and Raymond's only Academy Award win. So as Ben mentioned, thank you for pointing that out. You can't qualify if it's not original music or it's not an original song. So here we have the actual winning for Best Musical Score in a Motion Picture. Is there anything else to add to the music? We've almost talked about every music number at this point.
It's just iconic music. And Leonard Bernstein and Stephen Sondheim were originators of the lyrics and music itself. And I think I read somewhere that they weren't a huge fan of the movie soundtrack because it's so much they add to the orchestration of it that they actually like more the minimal approach they would do for the musical on stage. But moving on to Best Music Score of a Dramatic or Comedy Picture, this one went to Breakfast at Tiffany's to Henry Mancini. So this is now Mancini's second Oscar of the evening, and he would actually go on to win 2 more awards for Best Original Song in 1962 and Best Original Score in 1982. Mancini, he was nominated for 72 Grammy Awards and he won 20. He was nominated for 18 Academy Awards and he won the 4, and he also won a Golden Globe Award, and he was nominated for 2 Emmys, so he was this close to getting his EGOT. He was an E away.
Best Short Subject Cartoon went to Surrogate.
Best Live Action Short Subject went to Seawards, The Great Ships.
Best Documentary Short Subject went to Project Hope.
Best Documentary Feature went to Sky Above and Mud Beneath.
Best Foreign Language Film went to Through a Glass Darkly from Sweden. And this is Ingmar Bergman's second consecutive Best Foreign Language Film win after he won for The Virgin Spring in 1960. He would go on to win in the same category for Fanny and Alexander in 1983.
Best Story and Screenplay written directly for the screen went to Splendor in the Grass, by William Ainge. This is Ainge's first and only nomination and win.
Best Screenplay based on a material from another medium went to Abby Mann for Judgment at Nuremberg. This is Mann's first and only Academy Award win. And Judgment at Nuremberg was a film based on a television play written by Abby Mann that also featured Maximilian Schell in the same role. The original television play aired in 1959 on April 16th. And in his acceptance speech, he said, "A writer worth his salt at all has an obligation not only to entertain, but to comment on the world in which he lives."
Judgment at Nuremberg. So I've always wanted to watch Judgment at Nuremberg, and I was like, okay, this is a perfect time to watch it because we're going to be comparing it, or at least talking about it. And I was shocked that that movie did not get more love, and it's gotten a lot of attention just because I've heard about it, but also maybe because as a Jewish person who has looked into and has learned about the Holocaust, like to know about these movies about the Holocaust and the repercussions of it afterwards. So like to watch then Judgment at Nuremberg, I was just so floored by how great of a movie it was, the subject matter, the writing of it, the way it was shot, the way it's styled. It's so good. And
so what's the story? Give me like a log line of what Judgment at Nuremberg is.
It's not necessarily Nazis, but people who were involved in the Nazi government who are put on trial for their actions during World War II and the Holocaust. So it becomes what's really happening is the American government in the world is condemning Germany. And this happened, and they're going after them through trials. And Maximilian Schell, who we'll talk about in a few minutes, who plays the German lawyer who's defending the Germans that are on trial, the whole crux of it is, well, were they just following orders or did they actually believe in what was happening? And I don't really want to say more than that because it's so fascinating. The performances are gripping, and we will talk about that in a few minutes. And just the screenplay itself, it is so much depth in the words, the dialogue, like it's so good. And I think it's a very important movie. I think that it's a movie that I wish that I watched earlier, and I wish I had more time to see it like over and over again, because I think it holds this weight that there are some movies I think are very important to cinema, and this is a movie right now, like to me, that I think is so important to cinema, and I don't think we really appreciate it for what it is. And as much as I love West Side Story, this movie certainly deserved the screenplay award, and probably more awards than it should have. The fact that it was nominated 11 times and this is only its first award from that evening for best screenplay based on another medium is fascinating. So I don't know if it's the world kind of hiding behind the lights and the colors of West Side Story and not willing to accept some of the horrors and atrocities that get unearthed in Judgment at Nuremberg. So I'll leave it at that. I love that movie, so I think that we'll get there. We'll get there when we talk about Best Picture. Moving on to Best Supporting Actress, this one went to Rita Moreno for West Side Story. So this is Moreno's only Academy Award win and nomination. In 1978, Moreno earned her Primetime Emmy Award for The Rockford Files, cementing her status as an EGOT winner. She also has a triple crown of acting with competitive wins for acting for an Oscar, Tony, and Emmy. Moreno is the first Hispanic actor to win the Triple Crown and is one of only 2 Triple Crown winners who have also achieved EGOT status. After winning the Oscar, Moreno thought she would be able to continue to perform less stereotypical roles that she had been performing previously, but she was disappointed. She would say, "I showed them I didn't make another movie for 7 years after winning the Oscar. Before West Side Story, I was always offered the stereotypical Latina roles, the Conchitas and Lolitas in Westerns. I was always barefoot. It was humiliating, embarrassing stuff, but I did it because there was nothing else. After West Side Story, it was pretty much the same thing, just a lot of gang stories." So she obviously had a lot of struggles for after her performance, and even though she won, there's still clearly a lot of the racism that still existed within Hollywood. And just one final note I wanted to say about the character of Anita, and this is now my favorite Oscar metric, Oscar stat out of everything. So there are 3 characters in film history that have earned 2 actors Academy Awards based on their performances of them. So we have Vito Corleone, Marlon Brando, and Robert De Niro each won Oscars portraying Vito Corleone. We have Joker, the Joker character that was performed by Heath Ledger and Joaquin Phoenix, that they each won their Oscars. And now, because of this past Academy Awards ceremony, Anita from West Side Story is part of those characters because Rita Moreno and Ariana DeBose both won for Best Supporting Actress. So I think it's just a fascinating stat to include those 3 characters within that kind of accolade. So definitely, I like Rita Moreno's performance, but if I have to say, John, Judy Garland should have won for Judgment at Nuremberg. But let's move on to Best Supporting Actor.
I want to take back before we move on. I said Rita Moreno gives a bad performance in this movie. I shouldn't have said that. I was heated in the moment, okay? I'm retrospectively taking that back. It's not a bad performance. I was just very disappointed in the performance leading up to A Boy Like That. It just felt, and that's probably bad direction, to be honest. Like, she just is very stone cold, and it doesn't seem like she's grieving over her boyfriend at all until you get to the song. So she does give a great performance otherwise, I think, throughout the movie. And I didn't really talk about Anita's attack scene, but yeah, it's really tragic, and it's horrifying that she had to like go through that again and kind of perform that while trying to remember all the previous horrors that she had to go through. But you know, it is a really touching and important role in this film, and it's an important monument for Oscar history that she won this award, and then the fact that she's an EGOT winner, and then the fact that she would come back again to play in the remake as a different character entirely was, I mean, it's kind of magical. Like, there's not many moments in film where you get something like that happening, which is really, really, really cool. But like you said, moving on to Best Supporting Actor. Best Supporting Actor went to George Chakiris from West Side Story. Frustrated with the progress of his career, Chakiris left Hollywood for New York. West Side Story had been running for a year on Broadway, and Chakiris auditioned for Jerome Robbins. He was cast in the London production as Riff, leader of the Jets. The musical launched on the West End in the late 1958, and Chakiris received excellent reviews, playing it for almost 22 months in a row. The Mearish brothers bought the film rights to West Side Story and tested Chakiris. They thought his dark complexion made him more ideal for the role of Bernardo, leader of the Sharks, and cast Russ Tamblyn as Riff. This was the 4th film to win both the Best Supporting Actor and Best Supporting Actress Oscar for George Chakiris and Rita Moreno, respectively. Previous films to accomplish this feat are Streetcar Named Desire, From Here to Eternity, and Sayonara. Films who went on to do that would be The Last Picture Show, Julia, Hannah and Her Sisters, and The Fighter. So it's so interesting that he got to play such an opposing role that what he actually would come to know Jacaris in this film playing, Bernardo, who is such like a opposing character to Riff, and to think about how for 2 years straight he played the character as Riff and then had to go against him. Also horrifying again that because he had a dark complexion that they were like, let's make this guy the leader of the Puerto Ricans. Like, what? It's just absolutely insane. They're like, no, let's not cast him as the person that he literally played for 2 months and that he could literally read the lines in his sleep. They're like, let's challenge this guy and see if he can learn the entire opposite role, basically.
Yeah, but he does a great job with it, and I struggle with like this win because I like Judgment at Nuremberg so much, and Montgomery Clift got nomination for his appearance in the movie, but Burt Lancaster in Judgment at Nuremberg, he should have been nominated as well. So it would have been interesting if we had.
Wow, that's a stacked cast. Oh my god.
Oh, dude, the cast in Judgment at Nuremberg makes you like it drops your mouth when you see it, and then you see
wow
not only what they look like, but then their acting performances. You're just like, my god. Anyways, I digress. Let's move on to Best Actress. This one went to Sophia Loren for Two Women. This is Loren's only career win out of 2 nominations. She would go on to be nominated for Marriage Italian Style in 1964, and she received an honorary Academy Award in 1991 for her lifetime achievements. Sophia Loren became the first thespian to win an acting Oscar for a non-English speaking role, as well as only the 7th person ever to win the Best Actress for a film with a single nomination, a feat that would not occur again until 1989 when Jodie Foster won Best Actress for her performance in The Accused. So I watched Two Women in preparation for this episode, and Sophia Loren knocks it out of the park. She's great. It's an Italian movie. It's another World War II movie, actually, about Italians who had to flee from Rome and then coming back and the repercussions of what happens after the war. She's great. She's really great in this movie. I am not shocked that she won for this. It's great to have a non-English speaker winning this award because it shows how global cinema is and how global the Academy Awards are. So yeah, I would definitely recommend seeing Sophia Loren, Two Women. I think it's on Amazon and it's only like an hour and a half. So, not that much time you have to spend watching it.
Best Actor went to Maximilian Schell for Judgment at Nuremberg. This is Schell's only Academy Award win, and he was nominated for Best Actor for The Man in the Glass Booth in 1975 and Best Supporting Actor for Julia in 1977. Schell was also nominated for Best Foreign Language Film as director of Erst Lieb in 1970 and The Pedestrian in 1973, which was the first win for a German-speaking actor since World War II. Biographer James Curtis notes that Schell prepared for his part in the movie by reading the entire 40-volume record of the Nuremberg trials. Author Barry Manouche describes the impact of Schell's acting. Again, on the big screen, he was nothing short of electrifying as the counselor whose determination to place the blame for the Holocaust on anyone but his clients and brings morality into question. So, we have a huge win. Ben, you've seen the movie. I haven't. Is this a worthy win?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, this is a... Yeah, I mean, as you were saying before, how it's described as electric, like he is electric in this movie, and he plays a character who he's the German lawyer, defending the Nazis that get put on trial, and so you can imagine like the depth and the conflict that he would have to bring to that role and that character, and it's so provocative and so effective that you really can't help it when he goes on these like huge monologues and speeches and he's in this trial arguing. It's riveting, and it makes you think like about the Nuremberg trials, and I think all Nazis should have been condemned, but it's the morality questions that he brings forth. It's fascinating, and he is so good in this role. Like you can't help, like as soon as he gets on screen and as soon as he starts speaking, you're like, oh, this is a good performance. You can tell almost instantly from it. So absolutely deserved win for Maximilian Schell. And Spencer Tracy, who was also in Judgment at Nuremberg, was nominated in this
That's
category.
crazy.
And he was just as good.
I just didn't think they could be more stacked than it already is. That's absolutely insane.
Oh yeah. Best director went to Robert Wise and Jerome Robbins for West Side Story. This is the first film to win a Best Director Oscar for two directors. This would not happen again until 46 years later, when Joel Cohen and Ethan Cohen shared the award for No Country for Old Men in 2007. So, as we said, Jerome Robbins was fired from the production because he was going over budget. He was taking too many takes. He was really working the actors to the bones, and they were like, nope, this is not going to work. You're not a traditional film director. I think it's the only film that he ever directed. So the fact that like his only film that he directed, he won the Oscar for, is a feat in and of itself. And Robert Wise, he would go on to have a career. He would also work on The Sound of Music. So he had a pretty successful career. And it's, again, like I feel like I have to challenge this again because you kind of mentioned it before about like how some of the direction is like not great, and it's like, it makes me ask that question is like, is it because the musical is so good that you don't like that's what drives it, and that the popularity of it? Like obviously Spielberg in the 2021 remake did a phenomenal job with it, but he didn't win an Oscar for it, but these guys did. And I just, it's fascinating that they would go on to win, especially considering the turmoil and the fact that one of them was just completely cut out of the production entirely because he was doing too much.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, I think it's more of just the feat that they pulled it off, that they had all the choreography and the singing, and I imagine just how difficult it was probably to like sync up everyone's voices. Everyone's not even singing for the most part, except for a couple characters in the film. So I think it's just an overall credit to how the film looked, how everything came together. Clearly, people loved most of the performance here, except for Maria and Tony. So I think it makes sense in terms of what we've seen so far and just how much people love the film. Now, whether Judgment at Nuremberg is better directed, it sounds like there's hell of performances in that film.
Yeah.
And the nominees for Best Motion Picture of 1961 are Judgment at Nuremberg, The Hustler, The Guns of Navarone, Fanny, and the winner of the Best Motion Picture went to Robert Wise for West Side Story. With its win of 10 Academy Awards, this became the biggest Oscar-winning musical of all time, beating the record Gigi set 3 years before with its 9 Oscars. It is the only movie winning exactly 10 Academy Awards. No other movie has 10 Academy Awards, although Ben Hur, Titanic, and The Lord of the Rings: Return of the King have won 11 Academy Awards.
Yeah, so the fact that, and when I saw that stat, I was like, wait, really? And I looked it up and I was like, yeah, there have been movies that have won 9, 8, etc., but 10. Like, so the fact that West Side Story was so close to that number 11 that we've talked about before. And guess what it missed out on, John? Do you remember? Best Screenplay. It lost to Judgment at Nuremberg. So it's fascinating. So let's jump into some stats and figures first. So first, West Side Story has a 92% on Rotten Tomatoes with an average Rotten Tomatoes rating of 8.38. Top critic percentage give it a 90 of an average rating of 8.8. The audience score percentage is an 84% with a 4.14 out of 5. IMDb, it is a 7.5. Metacritic gives it an 86. And again, it won 10 Academy Awards out of 11 nominations. So, John, is West Side Story worthy of the Best Picture Award of 1961?
I haven't seen Judgment of Nuremberg, so I gotta get to that. Maybe my opinion will change over time. I gave West Side Story an 82, and I do think it's worthy. I think we have a kind of bright electric film. I think this is very hard to pull off. Definitely for the time. I think it's it is really electrifying. While I don't think the performances are the greatest, I think they can definitely be improved. I think we see that from the remake, as I pointed out. But I really enjoy this movie. I mean, I love the editing, the transitions, and just the style of this film. It's so well choreographed and posed and pictured. I think you could honestly study the opening and just study every frame of how well choreographed it is and how well timed it is and how well the movement and the pacing of the opening and even just the introduction to the film overall, showing us further into New York City. I was actually stunned by it. I was absolutely amazed. And I started the podcast talking about a movie that I was forced to watch, and that kind of puts a sort of hatred on it, and something that kind of sticks with you. And I went into watching this movie for a second time, kind of like dreading it, knowing how I felt when I was in middle school way back in the day. And I came out being like, this is a stunning movie. It is so well made technically and really, really charming, when it comes to a love story where it's love at first sight and how it kind of all falls apart. It's really tragic in a really touching way that obviously comes straight from Romeo and Juliet. So I absolutely do think it's worthy. I think it's definitely a feat in film. It's really an astonishing feat how they kind of brought this all together and made it really, really touching.
Yeah, so I'm going to give it a worthy rating as well. I gave it an 85. So maybe not the most solid rating that I've given before, but this movie, from all the technical aspects, it knocks out of the park. Cinematography and editing, number one. Like those are the top two things about the movie itself. The lighting design is great. The costumes are really good. So it deserves all these technical awards that it won for. Now, when it comes to the acting itself, I really don't think it's that anything special. I think Rita Moreno and George Chakiris are fine, but did they deserve Oscars? Maybe not. I mean, they're fine. But again, like Richard Beymer and Natalie Wood were like, what the fuck? When there's the singing, it was great. I loved it. But when it came to the actual talking, it just wasn't for me. And I don't know. I just think that when we compare it to so many other movies that we watch, it doesn't really hold up, especially in some of the musicals that we have and will see. It's just this is not really my favorite acting. The choreography is really great and it's powerful. It's evocative. And just overall the movie, like, I feel like you really can't go wrong because it's West Side Story. Like, the musical is so good. Like, the musical might be one of the best musicals made ever. So it's kind of hard. Like, you have to really fuck it up to like, to make it a bad movie. So it's a very good movie. I think that it captures the essence and the fun of it. It gave everyone access to it, and it's exactly what people want to go to the movies for, which is to have fun, be entertained, cry a little, laugh a little, and it has it all there and to be entertained. Saying all that, though, if I had to vote, I would have voted for Judgment at Nuremberg, and it's one of these movies that I think that is so like important and it raises up such morality, and the screenwriting is so good. The acting is like hauntingly good. That I would have voted for it, and I get it. I get why like Academy voters wouldn't go for it, and I think about like what would have happened today, and the perfect example of that is, and we reference it a lot, but the La La Land and Moonlight comparison and fiasco. La La Land being West Side Story, Judgment at Nuremberg being Moonlight. I feel like if it was today in today's world, I feel like Judgment at Nuremberg would have won. It would have won because of the morality, because of the issues that it brings up, because it's so heavy with emotion and drama that how can you not award to that? Like, that's what kind of Moonlight did with La La Land. La La Land is great. It has the fun, the energy, the dancing, the stars. It has it all. But then when you look at Moonlight, it's like, wow, Moonlight captures so much of the issues that black men, specifically gay black men, face, and even just what black people face in their communities, throughout America. And it's it's just this social issue movie that is fantastic, and that's what Judgment at Nuremberg is. And it goes beyond just social; it goes into the psyche and everyone's thoughts and feelings about the Holocaust after. So I don't want to spoil too much for John, but I really would encourage John, you should watch it. I encourage a lot of people to go see it. I think especially for Jews in America and in the world, I think it's a very important movie to watch, because not just because it kind of is like, oh, well, were the Nazis to blame? That's not really the point of it. It's the fact that it became the people's like really the first glimpse into what the Nazis did and truly understanding it at the Nuremberg trial. So to have a movie version of that is fascinating, and it brings up all these questions for a lot of things. So that's my little diatribe about Judgment at Nuremberg. But West Side Story, it's phenomenal. It deserves the Academy Award. It's worthy. But I just would have voted differently. So, John, currently your rating 34 movies is a 72.9, and mine is a 75.8. Even your 100 for the apartment doesn't bring you past me yet. So that's it. I feel for West Side Story. Do you want to sing? I really wanted to sing with you, but if you don't want to sing, I get it. It's fine.
What song you want to sing?
I mean, we could sing I Feel Pretty if you want to. Come on, John. I feel pretty.
Oh, so I need
pretty.
to pull up the lyrics here.
I feel pretty, and I had to pull it up too. All right.
And gay. It's the best part.
And I pity any girl who isn't me today. I feel charming. Oh, so charming. It's alarming how charming I feel. And so pretty that I can hardly believe I'm real. John, don't you see that pretty girl in the mirror there? Who can that attractive girl be?
Where?
Such a pretty face, such a pretty dress, such a pretty smile, such a pretty
me.
I feel stunning
and enhancing.
Feel like running and dancing for joy.
For I'm loved by a pretty, wonderful boy. Sperm to worm, baby.
That wasn't even included in the movie. All right.
Well, it was in the remake, baby.
Yeah,
Sperm to worm.
Sperm to worm. All right. I think we've done it. West Side Story, Worthy Podcast. I'm Ben.
And I'm John.
And this is Worthy.
Tonight, there's only you tonight. What you are, what you do, what you say.
Today, all day, I had the feeling a miracle would happen. I know now I was right. For here you are, and what was just a word is a star.
Thanks for listening to Worthy, the breakdown of every Best Picture winner from past to present. You can listen to us wherever you get your podcasts. Check us out on Instagram at Worthy Podcast, on Twitter at Worthy Pod, and on Facebook at Worthy Podcast. Any inquiries can be submitted to worthysubmissions@gmail.com. Again, that's worthysubmissions@gmail.com.
10 it is. Womb to two? Sperm to worm.